Oh my God, this is quite amazing. I'm really excited to be here at this conference. I'm so excited to be talking to all of you who apparently are developers. That's what it says back on the screen there. I assume it's true. How many people in this room have used open source software? Trick question. I'm just trying to get you to warm up with some morning exercise. Everybody raises their hands. OK, great. Let me ask you a simpler question. How many of you use open source software because it doesn't cost anything? And how many of you use it because it gives you freedom? OK, now we're getting at it. Many of you probably work with open source software. Many of you probably work with collaborative programming and open systems. You work on open application programming interfaces. You work with open libraries. You work with patent-free software and technologies, with open protocols and open interfaces. And none of that is because of how much it costs. It's because it gives you freedom. I think that's one of the main things that people outside our industry do not understand. But if you're as old as me, you probably remember it wasn't always like that. In fact, throughout the 80s and 90s, there was a big battle over the future of software, whether proprietary software would dominate, whether open software would be available to everyone and used by everyone. I remember a time when I had to persuade companies that an open source version of the Unix operating system was as good, but probably better, than the closed source Sun operating system that they used. I had to persuade them that they could use these systems to replace their proprietary servers, file servers, network servers, firewalls, routers, etc. There was a time when Microsoft said, specifically Bill Gates said, that the internet would be one component of the information superhighway. But just one component, because what was more interesting was how data would be used in a proprietary fashion and propagated over proprietary protocols and closed systems. The idea was that corporations wouldn't open to the internet because too messy, too weird, too much porn. Instead, corporate systems would be perfect closed gardens, secure, with quality curated content, protected from the wide world. And if you work in a company that actually tried to put that into practice, you discovered that those systems ended up being insecure, virus-infested wastelands of stale, useless content. And eventually, most of the people who worked in these companies had a second phone, maybe a smartphone, so they could actually look up things on the internet. The internet won. The open, uncontrolled, unrestrained internet won. But it wasn't obvious that it was going to win. TCP/IP won. There was a time when people said ridiculous things like, I'm not so interested in the web. I'm interested in the technology behind the web, HTML. To misunderstand the power and purpose of a system like the web so much as to think that the value of that comes from a representational format for data and the ability to link it to other data, and miss the point that the really interesting thing is the ability of anyone, anywhere to become a publisher, the democratization of publishing, the open access to all of the information in the world, where if it's closed, it's irrelevant. If it's not accessible, it's irrelevant. And today, people say, I'm not interested in Bitcoin. I'm interested in the technology behind Bitcoin, the blockchain. 2 days ago, when this conference opened and people were asked, what is the thing you're most interested in? Blockchain, right in the middle of the screen, the biggest word there, blockchain. The blockchain is a data structure. It's not even a particularly interesting data structure. It's a hashed linked list. From a technical perspective, it's kind of boring. What's really interesting about the blockchain is how a blockchain is created. What is the process for recording data in a blockchain? And Bitcoin introduced a mechanism to do that, which is open, decentralized, neutral, borderless, and censorship-resistant. Open, neutral, decentralized, borderless, and censorship-resistant. Kind of like the web. Really, that's the interesting thing about the open web, that it is open, that no one really controls all of it. And even when some companies control big parts of it, there are parts that are free and weird, encrypted, underground, still open to create incredible new inventions like Bitcoin, which popped out of the internet and no one expected it. Neutral, because for the most part, content is routed across the web without regard to the content itself, or really to the source and destination. Censorship-resistant, because you cannot erase the web. You cannot remove information from the web. Bitcoin introduced a way to apply this to trusted information, specifically the most important trusted information, which is the ownership of currency, money. It created a way to have a recording of ownership in the blockchain without allowing anyone to have control over who can own money, how they can spend it, and who records on this blockchain. Bitcoin made money open, neutral, borderless, censorship-resistant, and decentralized. And the artifact of that technology, the deliverable, the product, the thing that gets recorded on your software node is the blockchain. And that blockchain is a necessary but not sufficient component to create the real magic, which is a platform for trust that is not controlled by anyone, that cannot be erased or changed after it has been recorded, a system that is open, neutral, borderless, and censorship-resistant. It's not about blockchain. In fact, if you take blockchain technology and you apply it in an environment that is closed, such that it is controlled by one party, such that a party can decide which transactions get recorded and which ones are not good transactions. They're bad transactions, evil transactions, ones that should be censored. Then you lose all of the interesting properties of the open blockchain. So whenever I talk about this space, I always put at least one word before blockchain, and that is open blockchain. And open means open source. It means open access. It means open to innovation without permission. It means innovation at the edge, not the center. It means no one is in control. It means there is no censorship. It means it is neutral. You don't require a patent to participate in this technology. It is neutral because in this system of trust, the source, destination or content of your transaction, or even the purpose of your transaction, does not matter. It will be routed. And there is no way to stop someone from routing. Almost every day I meet people who come to me and say, yeah, I'm kind of interested in Bitcoin, but I'm more interested in all the other applications we can do with blockchain. Not the blockchain, just blockchain. It's become a generic word. And in most cases, that word is meaningless. What it means is I'm trying to redo everything where I used a database, only now we can do it with something that is 100,000 times slower and less well-tested. If you create a centralized blockchain, if you have a central point of control, if it's not open, borderless, censorship-resistant, and neutral, then you should have used Microsoft SQL Server Enterprise Edition or Oracle. The problem is no one is going to pay a consultant to rebuild Dubai's real estate records on Microsoft SQL. That's not going to get you any magic VC money sprinkled over you just because you go to Silicon Valley. In your hotel room, you go in front of the bathroom mirror, you turn off the light, and you say, blockchain, blockchain, blockchain 3 times. And a VC jumps out of the bathtub and starts throwing money at you. I did a talk which was censored on Facebook the first day it was published. And it was called Blockchain versus Bullshit. Apparently that word is not good for Facebook, and censorship is something they do. Which kind of proves the point, really, because it's about centralization, it's about censorship resistance, it's about open access. It's about the ability to use a bad word to make an important point, to use the shock value to get people's attention, to then listen to the rest of the message. But that's okay, because I don't use Facebook anyway. But the bottom line is that this technology is interesting because, for the first time in history, it takes one of humanity's oldest technologies, which is money, and one of the most important aspects of human behavior, which is trust, and it embeds these in an open, interoperable network protocol without central control. This has never happened before. And yes, you can imagine a myriad of applications where the ability to trust in the network protocol and not have to trust in the other party you're interacting with, or in some kind of third party that acts as a mediator or intermediary. You can imagine many different applications. The problem is that a lot of those applications really depend on first establishing the fundamental application of value as a content type. When you turn money into a content type and make it something that is routable across the internet from any point to any point without reference to any third party, self-verifiable, self-authorizing, independently routable money as a network protocol, that creates the basis for all of the other applications. That creates the basis for applications of security and trust that we need to build as an infrastructure to start everything else. So yes, the blockchain, if it is open, if it is decentralized, neutral, and censorship resistant, can be used for so many interesting applications. Most of the companies you work for will not use it for that. They see the internet of money, and they want to build an intranet. The natural motivation of a corporation is control. The natural motivation of a government is control. And so they see this system and they say, well, we kind of of like it, I mean immutability, recordability, auditability, forensic analysis, cryptography, all of these cute things. Can we have it without the open, borderless, neutral, censorship-resistant aspect of it? Because we would like to make it closed, controlled, censored, and profitable. And they will build great intranets of money. And they will be stale wastelands, just like the Microsoft front page Outlook shit you have in the back office of your own corporation. So when somebody says, I've got a blockchain, I'm going to apply it to my new application, the first question you should ask is, what kind of blockchain and why do we need one? I only have one slide, but if I wanted to do a perfect presentation about blockchain to a corporate environment, as one of my friends on Twitter recently said, you only need one slide. It says, you don't need a blockchain. Thank you. Questions? The bottom line is that the number of applications where you truly need a borderless, global, censorship-resistant, neutral platform to establish trust and immutability that cannot be attacked or compromised by anyone, not even colluding state-level actors and giant multinational corporations, despotic, disgusting, dictatorial regimes, censorship-ridden hellholes. The only applications you need for that can be counted on the fingers of one hand, maybe. But I'll tell you which one application immediately is important. Money. We don't like to think that money is an important application, especially in Western liberal culture. Money is dirty. It's the root of all evil. It's not the money that's dirty. It's the current architecture of money, which is centralized, hierarchical, and controlled, that is dirty. Turning money into a network protocol that we can spread to the entire world and give to every person who currently doesn't have access to banking facilities, to the billions of people who are cut off from the current financial system, just to give us a bourgeois sensitivity of safety, which is a lie to start with. A system of control so pervasive that it has been weaponized throughout the West to be used as a system of political power and control. Proprietary money is the cancer of modern societies, and it has infected democracy, and it is killing democracy. And the answer to that is open, neutral, borderless, censorship-resistant, open source money as a network protocol, as an open interface, as a system that can be given to anyone who has an IP-connected device of the most basic functionality, which gives them the power to independently verify, authorize, authenticate, transact globally with anyone. And then, once we have that solid platform, we can build applications of trust, applications like authenticated voting, applications like ownership control for real estate and other assets, applications like open source law through smart contracts, open source privacy systems. Realize that cryptocurrencies today are the largest open, public, consumer, civilian deployment of public key cryptography that has ever happened. We have now arrived at the golden age of cryptography. The cypherpunks are finally winning, and we can apply that amazing technology to one of humanity's most ancient, most fundamental technologies, a system of communication of value that we call money. And for the first time in history, money is a content type. Money is a protocol. Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank you so much.
So I hope there were some questions that you had which show up here in a second, so we can go through those. First of all, I want to thank you for all the openness. Not so much about all the Microsoft bashing, because I work in Microsoft and open source, but you know, it's a thing we had in the past, and we're sorry about it. So the biggest upvoted one here is 3 entities own about 50% of the BTC hash power. Are we really decentralized? And if not, is it a bad thing? 3 banks could set up such a system with a simple database. Why blockchain? That's like 3 questions, isn't it?
That's great. Oh, it's up there. Great. 3 entities do not own 50% of the hash power. 3 mining pools pool together other entities who own portions of the BTC hash power. And one of the interesting things is that we don't know who owns BTC hash power because the mining capacity itself is anonymous. It's part of the design of the system. And by being anonymous, it cannot easily be coerced or coordinated. In fact, we've seen just in the last year attempts by very large mining consortia to apply their will on the Bitcoin economy as a whole, to apply this awesome power they think they have. And as soon as they tried to apply it, that power evaporated magically. They didn't have it anymore. I like to say, you know, you've got to understand that in a consensus system that has multiple constituencies, multiple participants, power is illusory. You think you have the most power in the system unless you try to apply it against the other constituencies in the consensus algorithm, and then that power evaporates. I like to compare that a bit to the Queen of England. Like, she has the power to dissolve Parliament, which she can do as long as Parliament isn't popular. But if she tries to dissolve a popular Parliament, she gets dissolved, right? So that's how it works. It's illusory power. It's ceremonial power. So no, it's not as centralized as you think. It is the world's most decentralized platform we have ever seen. I'd like to see it be more decentralized.
But seeing that it is, that you say we cannot know as it is anonymous, how do we not know it's actually being maintained by people who want to keep the status quo in money?
Because simply what is being created does not maintain the status quo at all. It threatens it in every way. And of course, this isn't just Bitcoin now. It's more than 2,000 cryptocurrencies that have created this wild ecosystem that is entirely out of control.
So do you think that ecosystem needs to regulate, or will it regulate itself over time with the wilder currencies going away because they're not going to be used?
Excellent question. Cryptocurrencies are the most regulated system on the planet. They're regulated by mathematics, not committees of unelected people.
When do we think we're going to see blockchain adopted by the biggest marketplaces like Amazon and by the mass sellers and buyers?
What kind of blockchain? An open, neutral, borderless, censorship-resistant blockchain? Well, arguably, it's going to be difficult for big sellers to adopt that because they have to operate within a system of money as weaponized political control. And so they cannot accept money that is open. It creates this incredible conundrum where open money is a bit of a poison pill for closed, centralized corporations. The question is not whether they will adopt it, because they represent centralized, hierarchical, controlled retail. The question is, will you adopt it to sell your product directly to another person? If you think commerce should be person to person, rather than person to corporation to Visa to investment bank to MasterCard to corporation to JP Morgan Chase to corporation to person. So I don't know if they're going to adopt it, but who gives a damn? Why don't you adopt it? Why don't you build something? Commerce has always been local, and we can make it even more local today.
What about scaling, though? Local commerce is nice. If I know the buyer, if I do things back and forth, I don't need money. I can actually do I used to build websites for companies and ask them to build me laptops so I don't have to pay taxes on the money that they gave me, and they actually could get it back from tax for building me computers.
Right.
This was a great thing, but it didn't scale when I started traveling around the world and went to other places.
Yes,
so
because
it's easy.
In that context, you need trust of the other party in order to transact. What this system solves is that you don't need to trust the other party in order to transact. In 2013, I sold my car for Bitcoin. I met a person who I had never met before. I met them at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night in a parking lot during a time that all the banks were closed. This is a transaction I cannot do with the traditional banking system. If they give me a check, it might bounce. If they do a wire transfer, it might be forged, and I can't check its validity. And if they give me cash, it might be counterfeit. 3 confirmations later, I gave them the key to my car. Because after 3 confirmations of the Bitcoin blockchain, that money was mine, irreversible, unquestionably real, cannot be forged, and I could verify that independently from my cell phone while I was having Chinese food waiting for 3 confirmations. That is a transaction you cannot do. That is person-to-person commerce, kicking out all of the intermediaries, and without having to trust anything other than the network protocol. So that's exactly why we can do commerce locally now.
Okay. Which ties into the next one we have here. Do you worry about Bitcoin failing because the masses don't understand Bitcoin?
As much as I worry about the internet failing because the masses do not understand BGP, TCP/IP, or Windows. The bottom line is that today the system is only usable for those who have some level of technical expertise. I sent my first email in 1989. I used a command line client, about 2 years of Unix experience, on a mainframe to send an email that took 3 days to cross the internet using store and forward UUCP. That was an experience no one in my immediate surroundings could replicate for another 20 years. In 2009, my mother sent her first email on her brand new iPad by going like this. That's the gap of experience that we have today in Bitcoin. Bitcoin is exactly where the internet was in the very early 90s, possibly before DNS, because we don't even have good naming systems that are decentralized. We still have the equivalent of IP addresses, these long strings that are indecipherable to normal humans. The experience today is as geeky, impossible to understand, and unintuitive as you might expect, which means that probably the only people in Vienna who are capable of using it today are all in this room. But that's okay, because if you take that experience and you turn it into this, you can build a massive opportunity for employment for yourselves. You can build a new career. You can build a great new software project. You can create the applications that are needed for us to take this mainstream.
It's an interesting argument with the people understand the internet with TCP/IP packages and these kind of things. I've worked on Firefox OS, which was a completely open operating system trying to get in the mobile space based on web technologies, understanding all the web stack. It failed immensely. 80% of the traffic on the internet nowadays is either owned by Google, Amazon, or Facebook.
Yes.
People publish first on Facebook, then on the internet. So the open winning argument of the internet, as much as it hurts me, is problematic because Facebook made it easier to publish, much like banks make it easier to understand money.
Yeah.
What do we do about that gap in the perception of how easy it would be to have an open payment system?
We wait. Because if you think Facebook is going to be around forever, then you need to remember that at some point Microsoft controlled 80% of the operating system market because they made Windows easy to use on the desktop, and you could not use anything else. And now Microsoft is dominated by open technologies and open source because they had to succumb to the open internet. They lost the battle to close that, and I think Facebook is already losing. How many here use it as your first platform of choice? Oh, not a single hand. And
shocking.
kids nowadays don't join Facebook because their grandparents are on Facebook. Right? So the bottom line is that even if 20% of the internet is the free part, it is so radically free that it can give rise to completely unexpected phenomena like Bitcoin that cannot be controlled. And those phenomena then turn around and create a foundation for funding free, open, mesh, peer-to-peer infrastructure and applications through cryptocurrencies to re-decentralize and liberate the web. We're only getting started. The skirmishes are going to be delightful, but I think in the end, open always wins.
Okay. Talking about non-open, will GDPR and the right to be forgotten be a problem for Bitcoin and blockchains in general?
Yes. Bitcoin and blockchains in general will be a problem for the GDPR. The thing about talking to regulators is that when you first start the conversation, they think that you are questioning their authority to legislate. I do not question their authority to legislate. I question their ability to enforce. And that is a very, very different thing. So something gets recorded on the Bitcoin blockchain and someone says, OK, now forget it. Great. How do you enforce that? The answer is simple. You don't. Immutable systems are called immutable because they cannot be changed. And there is no party in the world, not even Satoshi Nakamoto, that can modify an immutable blockchain. And who uses that immutability? Who uses that power for the first time? Let me tell you who uses that. In China, there's a massive scandal at the moment of sexual abuse within colleges. Have you heard about that scandal? No, you haven't. Guess why? Because it would reduce the image of state-owned universities, so they suppressed it viciously. So one student who had been sexually abused by one of their professors recorded the incident on the Ethereum blockchain. It cannot be erased. It is now part of history, and it will never be erased. Who uses immutability when immutability becomes available to everyone? We do. And we use it to empower democracy, to empower freedom of speech. And if that's going to mess up some aspects of the GDPR, then it's going to mess up some aspects of the GDPR. Again, the question is not authority, it's the ability to enforce that legislation.
So how could you work against a wrong accusation that gets stored in Ethereum?
You also store the correct information.
And how do you connect the two?
Well, you can connect them with a hyperlink, which would be the de facto way to do it on the web today. Justice Brandeis in the United States Supreme Court said, the best antidote for bad speech is more good speech.
Excellent.
And I've always believed that's true.
How do you think energy consumption problem for mining will be solved? How do we get this new hardware, better chips? There's already a setting where it gets better, but there is an issue that Bitcoin mining costs a lot of energy.
Bitcoin mining uses exactly enough energy to be resistant to state-level actors compromising the security of the system. And in order to have a globally decentralized platform of trust, you need an enormous amount of security. So if you think that's a problem, it's actually a feature. Now, you might be horrified by the amount of energy consumed in order to do this trust platform. I argue that it's a very good application, especially since it is market calibrated dynamically through an algorithm so that it doesn't just get bigger the more transactions you put in. In fact, the more miners participate, the less profitable they get. The problem we have today is that a lot of energy use is invisible to us. So how much energy do you think is used to mine gold? How much waste is dumped in rivers to mine gold? How much energy is used by the data centers, the building blocks, the commuters, and the systems used by Visa? How much energy for armored trucks to move around cash from bank to bank? Or in many societies where cash is king, right? How much energy is used to print this cash? These systems are not existing in a vacuum. They are replacing economic activity that happens through other means. And those other means are centralized, politically controlled, and very energy wasteful. We're making a trade-off here. A system that doesn't use any energy is a system that is not secure. A system that is cheaper to operate is a system that is cheaper to attack. And that's why mining uses this energy in cryptocurrencies. It turns out we might only need one proof-of-work algorithm to create a global immutable platform for everything else to refer back to. But to me, that's probably one of the most important pieces of infrastructure we are building in the 21st century. And it needs to be absolutely unassailable. That's a great investment of energy. In fact, because mining can occur anywhere and be just as profitable as anywhere else, miners seek out the cheapest sources of electricity they can find. In some cases, unfortunately, that's coal. But in many cases, it's actually renewable energy that has been built with excess capacity for future needs in places where there is no electricity distribution network to transport that energy. Meaning, if you build a solar-powered plant, or a wind energy plant, or a hydroelectric plant in a region that doesn't have a distribution network, and you build it to account for capacity over the next 5, 10, 15 years, with cryptocurrency mining, you can now defray the capital expenditure in 2 years instead of 10, which then creates more investment for alternative energy. These things are not as simple as you might think at first glance. This is a very complex economic concept, and we still don't know how it's going to play out.
So it sounds like an arms race between the existing model and the Bitcoin model, and both of them need energy at the moment.
Yes. All of human civilization is an arms race. Now we're just doing it in the virtual domain, and we have better weapons.
I don't think any weapon is good, but fair enough.
Oh, well, the beauty about cryptography, and the reason it appeals to me as a pacifist, is you can only use cryptography defensively. There is no offensive use of cryptography.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that. How would you solve the blockchain-size storage issue once widely adopted?
Well, there's a couple of ideas about that, but the main one is that Moore's law is very, very helpful, and it gives us greater capacity to store things on personal devices and smaller devices every year. The second answer is that, very much like the internet, this will not evolve as a single layer. And with the internet, we've seen the evolution of multiple layers above the internet that give us greater and greater capacity. If you wanted to transmit a movie or sound in the early 1990s, you didn't have the capacity on the internet to do that. What was the greatest invention in order to increase the ability to send video and audio across the internet? Was it greater fiber optic capacity? No. It was an invention at the Fraunhofer Institute of a technology called MP3, perceptual encoding and compression, which allowed us to take audio and video and shrink it by 2 or 3 orders of magnitude. That invention allowed us the scale of the internet. So there's 2 schools of thoughts in engineering. One is make the pipe bigger, and the other one is make the content smaller. And in cryptocurrencies, we're doing both.
MP3 is an interesting example because it was encumbered by IP until 2 years ago.
Yes.
So not everybody could use it in open projects.
No, people had to develop Ogg Vorbis, which is why it's interesting that in our technology space right now, the patents are not yet quite developed. So we have this rare opportunity. This is the very early days, this golden age, the honeymoon period, where you can work in a space that is truly unencumbered by patents and truly open. If you experienced the internet in the early 90s, you know what I'm talking about. There was this perfect moment where everything was possible. That's how I feel about the cryptocurrency space today.
Excellent. Being that you helped write Mastering Ethereum, what do you think about its future viability for scaling versus current blockchain application platform competitors? I think you're positive about this, right?
I think it's important to note that a platform like Ethereum, which is a smart contracts open source law platform, is actually much more difficult to scale than a money platform like Bitcoin. But it's always the case in engineering that there are trade-offs, which means when you create something that's cheaper, faster, and more efficient, often it has some kind of negative trade-off, right? Maybe it's more centralized. Maybe it's not as open as it was before. I think you'll see a lot of the competitors in the cryptocurrency space kind of hand-wave at these trade-offs. And they say, we've solved all the problems. But if you look more carefully, what they've done is they've traded efficiency for centralization. That's a trade-off that's easy to make. It's almost impossible to reverse. You can't buy more decentralization later by giving up efficiency. That's a one-way street. All of these systems start at their most decentralized, and gradually over time they get less and less decentralized until we have to disrupt them again. That's what happened on the internet, that's what happened on the web, that's what's happening with Bitcoin and Ethereum and all the other cryptocurrencies. So, not an easy trade-off. In terms of scaling, there are many, many, many simple solutions, which are all wrong. And there are a few very, very hard and complex solutions that are all being researched.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Let's do a quick last one. Do the last one here. Will the blockchain technology replace trust encoder like banks in the future completely, or do they use it to be prepared for the future even better? Do you think there's a consensus working with banks, or do you think they will be replaced the way they are right now?
I think they're going to be able to use this technology about as successfully as newspapers have been able to use the web.
By putting ads in front of our place?
They're still around, but nobody cares. More seriously, there are certain applications that you can't do with blockchains. For example, you can't create money out of nothing and just give it to very rich people, corporations, and other banks for free. No, for that, you need the euro. For that, you need quantitative easing in a national currency where you can steal from the people through inflation and give it away to the richest around us. That's how quantitative easing works. You cannot do fractional reserve banking with cryptocurrencies. You cannot create money out of nothing. For that, we're going to need banks. So if you want a debased currency, there's only one place you can get that, and that's the traditional banking system. But the fundamental application of a checking account, the fundamental application of a payment network, of the ability to pay bills, do commerce, transact with others, that is now a protocol. And when you have a protocol competing on zero marginal cost against the sclerotic, slow-moving institution with massive costs and massive security problems, guess who wins every single time? I think that's a good place to end, right?
Hopefully.
Very good.
And the future to foresee. Thank you very
so
much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Will you be around for more questions later? Will you hang out at the conference a bit, or?
Yes. So I'm going to be at the WeAreDevelopers booth. And I would like to say hello to all of you quickly. And if you have a book, I will be happy to sign it for you. Come and see me at the WeAreDevelopers booth. Thank you so much for having me. Thank you.